guys. So as we are working on the annotated bibliography and also transitioning into the digital essay, we're going to have everybody's favorite conversation, plagiarism. And also, I guess some of the common errors that people run into, especially with paraphrasing, which is one of the things that you're working on in your annotated bibliography, putting things in your own words, and also something we'll be practicing more as we get into the digital essay, knowing when to quote, when not to quote, what kinds of things are actually like quote worthy, and again, like some of the problems that people run into. And when I say plagiarism, I don't mean like the obvious plagiarism, like I bought a paper online or I copied and pasted like a whole article. I mean more like the gray area, the times when people, it could be intentional, but the times when people often are plagiarizing and don't even know that they're doing it. So we're going to be going through 2 times when that happens as we kind of walk through this presentation. So the first thing we have to talk about with plagiarism is that I guess it's important just to understand that plagiarism is a cultural concept. It means different things in different cultures, and a lot of cultures don't really recognize like Western concepts or notions of what plagiarism is. We sort of have this idea that like language and ideas can be owned. Like if I said these 5 words in this order and they were wonderful, then if you use those 5 words in that order, you need to credit it to me because I said it first. Therefore, it is mine. If I said this, if I came up with this idea and I came up with it first, the idea is mine. So if you reference that idea, you have to credit it to me and give me credit for that because I own that idea or I own that language and that wording, which is not the case everywhere. You have some cultures where what is focused on in the writing is the product. And if there's a lot of like research and knowledge, then and the writing is the writing is beautiful, the quality of the product, then it's not necessarily as important that every single thing, if the writer is showing knowledge in the text, then it doesn't necessarily matter as much whether or not every single thing is credited to where it came from. So it can be different in different places. So just kind of keep in mind, like when you're talking about different cultures and different countries and different parts of the world, the values can be different. Sometimes even using like the words and ideas of others is considered a sign of respect and indication of knowledge, whether or not it's been credited exactly the same way that we would do it. But it is an important part of being in an academic community here, and we do culturally like really value like knowing exactly where certain ideas and language came from and being able to trace it back. So it is an important part of our academic culture here. So I want to talk about, I know this may seem obvious, but I want to clarify and write this down in your notebook. This could help you later. The difference between, I guess, plagiarism versus what is considered a misuse of sources. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes. So in an instructional setting, for it to be plagiarism, it should be deliberately using someone else's language, ideas, or other original material without acknowledging the source. So like not common knowledge stuff, but this is clearly like an author's point. It's a study result. It's clearly not yours and you're trying to pass it off as yours. You copied and pasted this, put it in your paper, and made no attempt to cite it, right? So what is not plagiarism and what we would typically consider a misuse of sources is attempting, if you try to cite it, even if it's clumsy, or it's incorrect, or it's missing something, it's not plagiarism. It's a misuse of sources. And you may run, and this is kind of a recent conversation, so you may find that I guess it's possible that in a certain, like in a particular class, you could have misused a source and the professor might still consider it plagiarism. So it's helpful for you to know this in case this comes up, because I have had students tell me stories where they did try to cite something, but it was incorrect, and someone tried to tell them that it was plagiarism, and that is incorrect. That is a misuse of a source, and it would be in that case up to that professor to decide to take off points, give you no credit, but it's more of a class issue, not a plagiarism issue, if that makes sense. So one of the reasons to really think about, especially in academic community, understanding that it is our kind of a cultural idea and a cultural value here, why to cite correctly. One, and we're going to talk about this concept, the idea of ethos, a little bit more as we get into the digital essay, but it does build like your ethos as a writer. One of the things we talked about with using like poor sources, or even using like a tertiary source far removed like Wikipedia, that it hurts your personal credibility. And that's what we're talking about here, your personal ethos, your personal credibility. When you're citing, and you're citing correctly, and we can see like exactly what sources you're using and where they're coming from, and go see those sources, it does a couple of things. For you as the writer, it shows that you are knowledgeable and credible. It makes you more trustworthy, and therefore helps your reader understand what you're talking about, helps your reader buy into what you're talking about. If you're writing an argument, it makes you more persuasive, because you're more trustworthy. It demonstrates fairness. So again, that's also part of appearing credible, and being a credible writer and researcher is being fair, showing that you have considered multiple points of view. And if you've cited multiple sources and talked about those sources, then and they're from different perspectives, then readers can see that. So it helps us see what you're doing and see the research that you're doing. And that's why we like it. And it does offer background by placing your work in the context of the conversation. So we've talked about wanting to be able to see the conversation that's taking place, and your work being situated in a conversation, and being able to see the sources helps do that. Being able to see all of the other people that have been talking about this, and you're speaking back to those blogs and documentaries and news articles, and you're working them in together and linking us out so we can read those, and you're really creating an illustration of the conversation and putting your work into some context. Okay, so another reason for this is that it helps readers follow your thoughts, and sort of understand how your ideas are related to and being pulled from other sources, and helps readers know, I guess, where to go to find out more. And it helps sort of differentiate between what's your thoughts and what's the writer's thoughts. We talked about that with signal phrases, with it being really important to know like which ideas are yours and which ideas are from a different author or a different writer that you're pulling from. So one, like we have, if you're reading through an essay, if you have a signal phrase here, I know that from here to here, because I have this in-text citation, this is from somewhere else. This isn't you. It helps to create, when you're using like signal phrases and in-text citations, it helps create this very clear fence. And we'll go over a little bit more about that as we move into the digital essay, where that becomes a little bit more relevant and something that we're practicing. But again, you see this in-text citation. I can be reading through your paper. I can see, oh, this is an interesting point. Here's where it came from. I can go to the works cited, and I can see exactly like the information for that source. And that's one of the things you want to make sure, is that when you're doing in-text citations and you're doing works cited, that there's an exact match. There should be absolutely nothing showing up in your works cited that does not have an in-text citation and show exactly where you used it in the paper. If you read it and consulted it and it helped you, cool. That's something you might put in a bibliography, just like a list of reading or resources. But there should be exact matches, where we can read through the paper and see, here's the point, here's where it came from, here's where I find it on the works cited. I can now go read more. There should be an exact solid chain there. Okay, so a couple things, and some of this is obvious. The materials that require knowledge, like quotes, paraphrases, summaries, things like that, we don't always consider summaries or paraphrases to be things that you're going to cite. So we're going to practice that a little bit more. Quotations are verbatim. They have quotation marks around them. I feel like we're all pretty clear on that, you know. It gets a little trickier when you get into paraphrases and summaries. And again, you're writing summaries now and you are, you know, putting things in your own words. You shouldn't need any in-text citations within that, because when you're summarizing, you're boiling things down and you already have a bibliographic citation for that source. So you shouldn't require any in-text citations in your annotated bibliography. So just kind of a side note there. Things that are not widely known or things that are arguable, help that you got from others should be cited. Oh, sorry. Should be cited. So facts that aren't widely known. So if it's something that is particularly specific to your conversation, not everybody would know it or your reader wouldn't know it, it's best to cite it. Okay. And my rule of thumb there is when it comes to citations, my rule of thumb is if you're not sure, cite it anyway. If you're not sure if you should cite it, you're welcome to ask a question. If you're still not sure, cover your butt and cite it always. But again, if it's something that is very like issue specific and you think your readers probably don't know this information, then you should cite it. Materials you don't have to cite, common knowledge. Like if I say like on 9/11 in the US, the Twin Towers, and I went on, we all know that it's a common event. We talk about it a lot. We don't have to cite that. So a lot of times like dates and events and things like that don't necessarily need to be cited. One, because they're either common knowledge or they fall under here. Ideas available in a wide variety of sources. Like news events or what I would consider Wikipedia type information. If you're reading something and it's available, like you have several sources that talk about this and you don't know where to cite it from, if you're not sure where to cite it from, then you don't need to cite it because it's not someone's unique, like ownable words or ideas. Typically like definitions, dates and events, common facts, those kinds of things don't require citation because you'd be able to find it in Wikipedia and in any other encyclopedia and reference commonly throughout like news and other articles on the issue. And if it's something that is like that, then you don't need to cite it because it's not ownable. Someone can't say, that's mine, you should have credited it to me. And then your own findings from primary research or field research. So if you conducted an interview, you should include that in your works cited, things like that. Note, language always counts. This gets tricky. So I said, for example, ideas available in a wide variety of sources like news. Okay, so if you're talking about an event that happened yesterday that was all over the news, you probably don't need to cite that. You could include, if you were writing an essay, you could and probably should include a link so we could go read more about it, but it's not like citable. You know what I mean? Like it's not something that you could get in trouble for not citing. However, if you copied and pasted like this one reporter, like maybe from the New York Times, you copied and pasted their words and used their words describing the event verbatim, now you have to cite it because it's not just ideas, it's language. So if you used that writer's description from that article and it's of their verbatim reporting, if we, took those 2 sentences and we put them in Google and searched, that article is going to pop up and show that it's an exact match. You have to cite that because that is that writer's wording and they can say that wording was mine. Okay, so not just ideas, language always counts. So you kind of have to pay attention to that as well. Okay, so why we're not quoting in the annotated bibliography. So a couple of things just to get started. Okay, so first, outside material. When I say like we're integrating outside material, working with outside material, we're talking about anything that you're using or writing about that's not from you. Like it's from some other source. It's from your books and your articles and that kind of stuff. So the 3 ways you can integrate outside material, we talked about this just a second ago or listed them: quoting, paraphrasing, summarizing. So quoting, writing to repeat. We're all familiar with that. Presenting ideas and wording of a source unchanged from the original. You put quotation marks around it. You do an in-text citation. You put it in the works cited, right? Cool. Paraphrasing is writing to translate. you would use this to present the ideas of a source, the ideas unchanged, but expressing them in your own writing style, in your own words, or in the style that best matches the genre you're working in. So matching the style of your annotation and how you're having to write that. You don't put quotation marks around it, but you're still going to cite it. You would still have a signal phrase. In a paper, you would still have a signal phrase, and you would still have an in-text citation. It would still go in the works cited because it's the idea. So this is the language, this one is the idea, right? So even if you put it in your own words, and you can tell, like, paraphrasing is usually like something you might quote, but you're going to put it in your own words, right? And we do this, and to translate means we either want it to match the style so it's not jumbled, or we want it to be more digestible. We want to make it more understandable, because sometimes when you're pulling from like certain text, the writing, your reader might not understand that. So you're going to put it in your own words so your readers understand it better. And a paraphrase is going to be about the same length as a quote. Like this might be like 2 sentences you would, directly quote, and a paraphrase might be like your own wording of what would normally be a quote, but it's going to be about the same length. It's a passage that you're pulling from. Sorry. Summarizing is different. It's writing to condense, and that's what you're doing. You are kind of, putting things in your own words and paraphrasing these ideas, but you want to think about it as being writing to condense. You're wanting it to be the most important ideas of a source in briefer form and in your own style. So kind of coming back to that paraphrasing a little bit. So putting it in your own words, but boiling it down. You do not put quotation marks, but you still put it in the works cited. So if you even reference, like in a paper, a documentary, and you explain what the documentary was about, you still put that in your works cited because you referenced it in your paper. So if you reference it at all, regardless of which of these 3 it is, it goes in the works cited section. So just make sure you're kind of thinking about that. And again, in the annotated bibliography, you don't need in-text citations or things like that because you're summarizing, you're boiling things down into briefer form, and you are, trying to condense it, and you already have a bibliographic citation there. So you wouldn't do an in-text citation for summarizing. And here's, I guess, one way to think about why you wouldn't. When you're paraphrasing, you're pulling a certain passage from that article. When you're summarizing, you're talking about the whole article. There's no place you're pulling it from. So you don't necessarily, like in MLA, you would show the page number you got it from. Well, you don't have a page number to show because you're talking about the whole thing. So there's no in-text citation required for a summary. Okay, so some of the problems with quoting that we'll come back and we'll talk about this again when we get into the digital essay and put it in a different context of writing in that style. A couple of problems we run into are overquoting, quoting too little. So either doing it way too much, not having enough, quoting for the wrong reasons, because not everything is quotable, and there's not always there are right times to quote, and there are right types of material to quote. So it can be really tricky, and it takes practice figuring out and being able to make decisions about what is worth quoting, what isn't, and when is the right time to do it, and when should you be paraphrasing. What happens when you're relying on quotes and kind of overdoing it is think about it. If you have ever listened to a conversation where everybody's talking at the same time, it gets pretty confusing. Rather than having if someone walked up to your conversation and they said, hey, what are you guys talking about? And everybody started trying to say everything in their own words, that would get pretty jumbled. But you would have one person probably recap what everybody's saying, one style, one wording. It'd be so much easier to understand, right? And having things in different styles. If you're looking through a Wikipedia article, if they didn't have a very rigid style for everybody to write in, and all of those people contributing were allowed to write in their own style, it would be a cluster. You wouldn't be able to understand what's going on because it would be all these different styles matched together. So that's something to think about. It seems like it's going to ramble and possibly lack focus, and ideas are going to be choppy. You're going to be bouncing from one thing to another. And a lot of times when we quote, You really have to pay attention to having only the things you're going to talk about and having only the exact necessary information when you're quoting. If you have these long pieces of information, you've got a lot of extraneous details in those quotes, and that's why it starts to seem like it lacks focus. It may have a lot of unnecessary material included, and it makes it really difficult for the reader to follow what's important and what's not. It also inadvertently, whether you realize you're doing it or not, we talked about having personal ethos and being credible and knowledgeable. And part of that is also a confidence. And when you over rely on quotes, it inadvertently reveals or sends a message that you have a lack of self-confidence in what you know about the issue, or a lack of knowledge on the issue. If you and I were talking about your research, you would probably be able to just talk to me, well, I read this, and I saw this, and this is what they said, and you could put it in your own words, and that shows me you read and you understand, right? And it does the same thing for your reader when you can put things in your own words. If you're constantly having to look back and read me what you found in your articles and just read it back to me word for word, that maybe shows me that you didn't read it or that you didn't understand it. And it's going to do the same thing for your reader. When you put things in your own words, it shows that you have knowledge on the issue and that you're not relying on other sources to do it for you. Okay, so times when it would be good to quote are to establish authority from an expert. So you're talking about this scholar who makes this point or has this piece of evidence and shows what you're going to say. And then of course you would want to show their words, because you don't want it to be hearsay, I swear this scholar supports what I say. You would want to say, in this article, so-and-so states, or their research suggests, and then say, for example, they state, and use a quote. If you're going to give example or illustration that you're going to talk about, you're going to explain. So an example from a recent event, you might quote from that to pinpoint a controversy, like a study result that shows a surprising trend, prove something that you're going to talk about. Again, talking about it is a key element, and we'll do a little bit more of that when we get to the digital essay. Or create dramatic effect. We all have our favorite quotes that we remember because they are eloquent and thought-provoking. So sometimes we'll quote for those reasons. But these are the reasons to quote. If it's common facts, bland, not what I call bland information, reporting information, dates, definitions, events, facts, those kinds of things you would not quote, because typically you're just reporting them. You're not going to talk about them or use them to prove anything, illustrate anything, back up anything, talk about. You're not going to talk about it. You don't really need it to prove something. So right now, we're going to, again, talk about this more when we get to the digital essay, but right now, a couple of main points to pull from this are, it's never a good idea to rely on quotes to do the work for you. Quotes are there to support and illustrate points you have already made. So you say it first, then you pull the quote in to back you up or to illustrate what you just said. But you always say it first. When you're doing summaries for this annotated bibliography, summaries are about boiling points down to the gist. Quotes are extra illustration and evidence. They are extra. They are details. Again, you've already said it. The quote backs you up or illustrates what you've just said. That's not needed in a summary because you want conciseness, not extra details. Paraphrasing builds, one, for class and for research, paraphrasing and having to put things in your own words and explain it in your own way. It builds your understanding as the researcher, and it shows what you know or what you're learning. If you're relying on quotes to do that for you, brings your credibility or what you're learning into question, whether it's intentional or not, whether you mean to do it or not. As a reader, I don't know what's in your head or what went on behind the background. I only know what I see, and quotes, relying on quotes, especially as a short piece, sends that message. If you know what the source is about, you should be able to explain the gist quickly in your own words without relying on quotes to do it for you. Again, if you're copying and pasting quotes from the source and putting them into an annotation, you're not summarizing what that source is. You're letting that author summarize their own piece. So it's important to put it in your own words. So we're going to go into some paraphrasing problems. This, or not, and paraphrasing is kind of the place where people get dinged for plagiarism the most. So we're going to talk about problem area 1 for paraphrasing. So first, the idea here is kind of wording. We'll often like unintentionally misuse a source when we try to paraphrase, because a good paraphrase matches, it's about the style and the sentence structure. It's not just about switching the words out, so they're kind of different. One of the bad habits people often have is to right click on that word and pick a new synonym from the thesaurus, but they leave everything basically the same and just switch the words out, and that can get you dinged for plagiarism. Here are the 3 things that should be different: word choice, sentence structure, order of ideas. So not just switching some words out. You want it to match the style, be in a different order. Sorry. So a couple of tips. I always say if you can explain it to a 7-year-old, you understand it. So probably not like for your scholarly articles, a 7-year-old, but you get the idea. So a couple of tips is, one, like, you want to make sure you understand the material. Like if I just said, hey, what's this about? You could explain it to me. Write it without looking at it. A lot of times people have a really hard time paraphrasing because it is next to impossible to find a better way to say something, or even a different way to say something when you're staring at the quote. It's unbelievably difficult. It's so much easier if you can't see it. Like if you just try writing it without looking at it, and then just check it and make sure that it's close, that you added in all the points you were supposed to, and then cite it. So much easier. So here's an example of something that's too close. I'm not going to read you this whole passage because it's super boring. But I'm going to look at the first couple of sentences and you get the idea. I've changed the color of the text so you can see where they switched out a couple of phrases or words. The rise of industry, the growth of cities, and the expansion of the population were the 3 great developments of late 19th century American history. The increase of industry, growth of cities, and the explosion of the population were 3 large factors of 19th century America. Okay, I want to make 2 points. 1, you can see how everything's pretty much the same. They just switched out words. 2, this one sounds horrible compared to the original, and that's typically what happens. They often, in the original, they picked the best words to use, and you're picking second best when you're just switching them out, or third best, or even things that don't really make exactly the same, mean the same thing. So it might even seem like it doesn't quite fit what you've chosen to switch it out for. So be really careful about that, because the rewording, when you do it this way and just switch out phrases, it never sounds as good as the original. It always sounds sort of forced. And here's another example of something too close. I'm going to use this for 2 reasons. 1, because this passage is true, and 2, to show the similarity. So students frequently overuse direct quotations in taking notes, and as a result, they overuse quotations in the final research paper. Probably only about 10% of your final manuscript should appear as directly quoted matter. Therefore, you should strive to limit the amount of exact transcribing of source materials while taking notes. Okay, cool. So 1, that's a pretty good point. It's going to sound weird, but over 60, probably, I usually have 60%, over half of your paper should be from you. It should be your own, paraphrasing, examples, points, that kind of stuff. And you want to make sure when you're pulling from outside material, whether it's summarizing, paraphrasing, or quoting, that outside material, about a third of it is actually quote worthy or should be quoted. So when you're looking at when you're doing that math, it actually comes down to about 10%. So you can kind of look through a paper and tell, if you're seeing quote, 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 it's too much, because more than half should be from you. and of outside material, you want more of it to be in your own words and only what is necessary and what you're using for specific reasons that we covered to be quoted. So I'm going to explain what this one means. So this first point here, students take notes too much in their own words, like, copy and paste kind of style, and that's why they quote too much in the final paper. So, I mean, really only about 10%, the second point, about 10% should be, in your own words, or sorry, about 10% should be quoted, and the rest either paraphrased or, summarized. And the way to kind of help with that is to take notes in your own words. So, students have too many quotes in the final paper, which should really be about 10%, but they often, directly copy their notes, and that causes the problem. So if you take notes in your own words, it helps with that. See what I did there? That was in a different order. I did it twice. I just explained what it meant. That's what you want to do. Just be able to explain what it means. So there are 3 main points, like students take notes in their own words, so they quote too much in the final paper. It should really be about 10%. You should really try to take notes in your own words to help out with that, okay? Remember that. We're going to practice with this in a minute. Students often use too many direct quotations when they take notes, resulting in too many of them in the final research paper. See, 1, you can see where I switch stuff out, just like exact like phrases and things. 2, this doesn't sound as good as this one. This sounds like they were trying to pull in some synonyms to switch it up. Like, it reads that way. It's choppy. It's horrible. So this is sorry, I'm going to get back to it. This is the activity that you're going to be doing in your notebook. It's very short. You're going to try to paraphrase the excerpt on the previous slide without looking at it. So it should take about 3 minutes. And when you're done, check to make sure you've included all those points and that it doesn't sound too similar to the original. So if I go back to that, you're using this one, the original. Remember, I went through it twice and kind of tried to put it in my own words a little awkwardly. There are 3 kind of points you want to hit, and just, try to make it your own. So pause, try to do that really quick, and then come back to me. And so as you got done with that one, you should have noticed maybe 2 things. 1, if you didn't really remember or internalize it, or couldn't just like talk about it for yourself before you started, then this was really difficult to do. And an important part of working with sources is knowing your research and understanding it before you start working with it and trying to write with it. Or if you tried doing what I said was going to be really difficult to do, like looking at it while you did it, then you noticed how hard it was to figure out, or maybe noticed how hard it was to figure out a new or different way to do it. And then this would be this is a little bit more formal, so this could sound a lot of different styles. Again, when you're paraphrasing, you're matching it either with the style you're working in for the genre, so like your annotated bib style, because there's a pretty rigid style and set of rules there, or you're putting it, with your style. So yours could sound less formal than this, and that would be fine. In research papers, students often over-rely on quotes, failing to keep quoted material down to a desirable level. Since the problem usually originates during note-taking, it is essential to minimize the material recorded verbatim and instead take notes in your own words. Good rule of thumb: if it can be color-coded to show the similarities the way I did it earlier, then it's too close to the original. You'll notice that in this one, I couldn't just underline where I switched things out, because it's all different. Like, it's word choice, sentence structure, and it's the ideas. It's, those 3 different things. So it's the order of ideas as well. So if everything is really like in a different order, I know if it's shorter, it's really difficult to do it in an order. That's more for longer passages. But if like the sentence structure is yours, if you're really putting it in your own words and you're not just like switching out synonyms, you're not going to be able to do this and color code it. So if you're looking back at your example and you could really mark like, I changed this, I changed this, I changed this, then you might want to make a note of that, because it would be too close to the original. Okay, problem 2, patchworking. Super common, especially in annotated bibliographies. Hint, hint, wink, wink. So direct like patchwork plagiarism. So when the writer copies material from different sources, or several locations in the same text. So like look at an article and for your summary, copy like the thesis and copy and paste like the main points. And then make no attempt to like just rearrange it a little bit and make no attempt to cite it. Or copy like you're writing a paper and like, let's say the paper is like due tomorrow. And so you go to this article and you copy and paste this passage, you go to this article and copy and paste this passage, you go to this article, copy and paste this passage, and maybe like rearrange a little. You could cite some of it, but you know, we said that deliberate plagiarism is when you use anything and you don't, like anything you're supposed to cite and you don't. So if you attempted to cite, if you patchworked it and you attempted to cite everything, the reader would clearly be able to see that you didn't write any of it. You pieced it together from other places. And that's a huge problem because you didn't actually write any of the paper. It's just so, and that's why it's called patchwork. You're literally like taking chunks from different places and sewing a paper together, as opposed to writing a paper and using sources. The sources are the paper, and that's a problem. So just kind of be careful about that. Here's kind of how it could look like. So this is using Turnitin, and I believe you're using VeriCite with Canvas, which works basically the same way, but you know. So this is 90% similar. Ooh, that's a problem. So this is not an anti-bibliography. This is an essay, but here's what it would look like. Like this is obviously like a common phrase, so it wouldn't matter if this popped up as similar. But this is an issue, and this chunk here is an issue, and this chunk here is an issue. You notice there's literally no like attempt to cite any of this material, but it comes from these places. And you could kind of see how this goes. Like this has literally just been like pieced together from different places. Maybe copied and pasted, maybe switched a couple of words out, but not any attempt to cite it. This person clearly wanted the reader to think that this was information from their head, that they wrote this in their own words, and they did not. Patchwork example 2, this is an anti-bibliography. So you can't see this on here, but this is like where they were talking about the author. This is an old one. And this is where we're talking about the summary. And you can see some of the summary is okay, but what's problematic here is that, is you have this, and all of this are from the same place, probably the article itself. So it doesn't seem like this person actually summarize the article for themselves at all. They pieced it together using the article that they're summarizing, which again is very problematic. And again, like you'll notice this, like sometimes your citations will pop up, like common phrases and citations are going to pop up as similar. That's fine. It's stuff like this that's problematic. I want to dispel a myth before I let you go. I've had people say before that they were told like just to look at the similarity match, like the big picture for the paper, and that is incorrect. It is about crossing your T's and dotting your I's. You could have an entire paper that's pretty well cited, and if you have one passage that you made no attempt to cite that's clearly copied and pasted, that's plagiarism. And so you want to make sure that you're really checking things. Like it is not just about the big picture similarity number. It is about how you worked with your sources and cited things in each instance that you used a source throughout the paper. So just kind of be aware of that. I hate to, that's the last point I want to make. I know that's like a super like terrible way to end this, but you have an activity where you're going to go and upload your draft to VeriCite and get a report back so you can actually see how it looks, like with your annotated bib, how it's going. If you have any like chunks that look too similar, so you can see, you know, when you're putting things in your own words, how things are going. And if you either notice on your own or notice from that report that things are pretty similar and they're not so much in your own words, it lets you know kind of for yourself what you need to go back and work on. And if you have any questions, people always have lots of questions about plagiarism, and it's perfectly okay to ask. Like this is the place to do it, because this is a class where we're practicing research and practicing writing and practicing citing. So this is the place to ask questions about this kind of stuff. Okay, so send me questions in the coffee shop. Peace.